everybody. Hi to all the guests in the room here at the Institute of Politics. Hi to all of our friends online. I'm Jennifer Steinhauer. I'm Senior Director here at the IOP. And I am joined today by Peter Katugin, who's the Sheriff of Middlesex County, Massachusetts. And he's here today because he's part of a major law enforcement effort to ensure fair and safe elections. We're joined on Zoom by New York Times reporter Jim Rutenberg. Jim has been chronicling efforts around the elections basically for the past 10 years. And we also have with us Maricopa County, Arizona reporter Stephen Richer. He's online, yes, that's right. And CEO of Check My Ads, Claire Atkin. They monitor what's going on online on a variety of topics, but also as it pertains to elections. And we will be joined at some point also by Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. And when Secretary of State Benson hops on, we'll include her in the conversation. Thanks everyone for being here. Jim, could you kind of get us started by laying the groundwork for what you've been working on for the past few months and kind of frame things up for us in terms of what the concerns are have been going on in the lead up to this election and tomorrow on election day and after.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm glad reporter Richer is here because he's been part of what I've been working on. And so we here, my job at the paper, my beat has kind of been what happens if everything goes haywire after the election and really covering the movement that built around and out of January 6th to challenge the election system in effect and really kind of sow doubt and using misinformation, question some basic processes, and the efforts by Recorder Richer and the sheriff and many others around the country to sort of stave that off. So here we are. Here comes election day. We've already seen that former President Trump is preparing the ground, should he need it, to challenge the system yet again, sowing already some false concepts about things that are supposedly happening in Pennsylvania that really aren't happening, seizing on the regular things that go wrong in elections, because things go wrong in elections. It's a human endeavor to turn them into bigger problems in Georgia. So now we know what happened on January 6th, 4 years ago. And so I've been following, and along with several colleagues here at the paper, and by the way, a lot of great journalists at other papers doing the same work, of following what became a much broader movement that not only didn't go away on January 7th, 2021, but ingrained itself into the most local parts of our election system to really try to make the job harder for someone like Recorder Richer and his colleagues around the country. And I think he'll have an answer for, what really the effect of it all. But yeah.
Let's go to Mr. Richer because you just gave us the big picture, Jim. You're looking all across the country. Let's narrow in to Maricopa County, Arizona. You guys were in the belly of the beast, the county where it all started. I know that the county has been fortified in those 4 years, but how are things looking? What are you worried about? What are you seeing in context of early voting and how everything's... Hello, Secretary. Thank you for joining us. Tell us what you are feeling there 4 years after the big explosion, if you will.
Well, fortunately, nothing exploded, but metaphorically, certainly so. I am feeling like one of those days in Hyde Park where you've spent all day in the reg, and then you come out and you're a little disoriented because it's not really sunlight's not really out, because I guess it's one of those 6 months where you don't really see sun in Hyde Park, and you don't know what's going on. But no, just kidding around a little bit. I'm a two-time University of Chicago person myself, so I wanted to pay homage to that. What are we seeing? It's intense here, and we have a lot of people who are, I think, in a good way, very interested in Arizona and very interested in election administration in Arizona. but there are a lot of emotions right now. And unfortunately, sometimes those emotions bubble up over the top and lead to some negative consequences for those of us who administer elections, particularly in swing states and swing counties. So we've been doing everything we possibly can over the last 4 years to provide more information about how elections are actually administered. And then we've been doing everything we can, from gates to guards to video cameras to port blockers, in order to ensure the safety of the voters, ensure the safety of the people who work the process, and ensure the safety of the ballot, such that we ultimately walk away with this, even if we take some bruises on the internet, that we ultimately walk away with election results that we are 100% confident with and that can withstand every single court challenge, because we know that we're just no longer in a context in which we announce the results and the media calls the winners and everyone just walks away and shakes hands. This will be litigated potentially for months, maybe even years, if it's like 2020. And so we have to do everything in our power to make sure that each part of the process is documented, is accurate, is lawful, such that when it goes to courts eventually, we stand up again.
Well, let's pose a similar question to Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson from Michigan, and I think she will brook no competition on places that are cold and dark from you. So don't try to compete there. You said in October, Secretary, on Face the Nation, that bad actors were attempting to create chaos and distrust around the election processes. Do you still feel that? How has Michigan both responded and preparing for that?
Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, undoubtedly the biggest challenge to election officials, election workers, and election security today is misinformation. We know our election processes are secure. There are layers of security that is time tested in place to protect those election results. Our results are accurate, and post-election audits always reaffirm this fact. Yet it's become a political strategy, really, to plant seeds of doubt about our processes and file multiple duplicative lawsuits. We just got word not 2 minutes ago that 3 of those lawsuits were just dismissed, but they still create an air of suspicion and illegitimacy about our processes. I believe that the best way to counter misinformation is for all citizens to be critical consumers of information in this moment and become educated about the security of our elections. And we're working to ensure that no matter where someone lives or who they vote for, that everyone has that rightly placed faith in our processes and has access to information about our processes. We've set up michigan.gov/election facts, a website where people can read about how we can debunk all of the conspiracy theories with facts. And we're also supporting clerks by investing in resources that they can use to spread information and educational information about our elections. And all that says, at the end of the day, nothing can duplicate the power of citizens to be informed about our elections. And that's what we're really dedicated to ensuring everyone has information about.
Now, Claire, your organization in some way picks up very neatly from what the Secretary was just talking about. What can ordinary citizens do to combat online information, and what are you seeing in your role of monitoring this, so to speak?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for being here. Check My Ads is a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit, and what we do is we monitor the internet. There will always be political incentive to spread hate or disinformation deliberately about the election. In order to have a free and fair election, you need to have a free and fair election. And then you also need a population that believes that you had a free and fair election. You need both of those things in order to be successful. And there is undercurrent of people who are trying to attack that second part. And it's not just politicians. At Check My Ads, what we do is we focus on the donut of grifters that surround those politicians. And those grifters are making a lot of money on digital advertising. So when you're scrolling Facebook, when you're scrolling Twitter, and you're going through and you're clicking on links, when you get to that website, that's when a payload happens for the grifter. that's when when you see digital advertising. I'm talking about those ugly banner ads that follow you around the internet. Nobody pays any attention to them, but they make millions for bad actors. A couple years ago, Check My Ads launched a campaign. It was called Defund the Insurrectionists. That's because 1 year after the insurrection, we found out that big, bold, daily brands were accidentally funding Steve Bannon and Dan Bongino and Glenn Beck and Fox News and a whole bunch of other folks who were making a lot of money off of the big lie. And I'm happy to tell you that we've defunded in part or in whole every single one of those websites because obviously Fox News was just in part, but every single one of those websites from digital advertising because the brands just did not want to be there. And I think that to answer your question, that's what leads us forward. Advertisers can pay attention to the economy that is upholding these donuts of grifters.
Okay, so if we're looking at this almost like a chronological story, Jim, you've been following this extensively. Obviously, all of you have been on the ground since January 6th on these issues. Let's go to the videotape of law enforcement, Peter. And how have you seen the role of law enforcement in election security change in your time as a sheriff? Was 2020 a watershed moment in the wider society? How are you approaching Election Day and the aftermath in your mind?
Sure. So I'm the sheriff up in Middlesex County, up in Massachusetts. I come to this from decades before because I was a child of a city clerk in my hometown of Waltham, Massachusetts, right? So my dad ran the elections year after year after year. I grew up in the city clerk's office. Every election day was a really special day. It was, it's a day to celebrate. It was like a Super Bowl for my dad. And he took great pride in running these elections year after year and never having problems. And some of you guys, glad to see a few more silver hair in here because I don't know if you used any of those old machines with all the levers and the pulleys with the curtains around. I used to repair those. My dad, by the way, said, we don't fix the machines, we repair the machines. So this was what I grew up in, right? And to think of what's happening now is really concerning to me. And yes, this happened before 2020. It was happening in 2019, where we were starting to see discussions and bubblings of concerns about elections and questions about elections. And then you saw the threats rise and rise and rise. And so law enforcement really wasn't prepared back then. There was a scurry to get ready in 2020. And Stephen can tell you a little bit down in Maricopa, that was a hotbed of activity. I had Paul Penzone was a colleague of mine down in Maricopa County. And we were all just learning what we should do and how to do it. But the hard part was we didn't know how to get involved. Because when you get involved, it seems like you're taking a partisan position. And so for police to get involved, they had to know how to get involved. They didn't know who to call, they didn't know who to speak with. They didn't even really know the election laws to be able to enforce the election laws because they'd never dealt with them. It was never a problem before this point. So yes, law enforcement has gotten 100% behind the understanding that this is a significant issue, the education of our colleagues, associations taking positions on the integrity of elections and sharing that with our colleagues, especially those in battleground states with whom I've spoken just recently that really appreciated the guidance that we were giving them and some of the cover we were giving them for them to be able to do their jobs and keep their communities safe and keep their elections secure at the same time.
I want to get down to the nitty gritty of what that looks like, but I want to take advantage of Secretary Benson because I know she has to leave soon. Here's something that's kind of close to the hearts of many people in this room, which is campus voting. And I know that that's been an issue in Michigan before. There were concerns about efforts to suppress campus voting or students trying to vote back home by a state, other states. There have been some misinformation there too. What can you tell us about campus voting that you've seen in Michigan?
Well, what we've seen about on-campus voting and college students voting in Michigan has actually been a great success story. We announced this morning that turnout in Michigan is running about 44% of active registered voters. But in Ann Arbor, one of our largest college towns in the state, turnout is 60%, well above the state average, really leading the state. And the second highest turnout in the state is coming from East Lansing, where Michigan State is at about 55%. So we're seeing, and we've seen that trend throughout, in no small part due to the local clerks. Marie Wicks in East Lansing and Jackie Beaudry in Ann Arbor have done an extraordinary job in making sure that they're meeting people where they are and actually showing up on campuses. There are early voting centers on these campuses where people can go and vote without even having to leave campus. We're seeing similar success in Grand Valley on the west side of the state and in Wayne State here in Detroit and all across the state, where while we may see a potential uptick in harassment and threats on election day, not just in college communities around the state, tied to really misinformation, what we've seen is actually having a physical presence of election voting facilities on campus has led to a significant increase in young people voting, and it's been a great success story. We also have a college campus advisory group that I started back in 2019, and they've actually helped us, among other things, create campaigns for educating and engaging young people and college students in particular in voting. So that has far outpaced any threats or harassment, and it's been a great success story in our state.
Well, before you leave, just quick question. Do you think you'll have your votes counted in Michigan by the end of tomorrow night?
Well, in 2020, we had the unofficial results within 24 hours of the polls closing. So we're on track to see that again this time around and perhaps even sooner. And we'll let everyone know what we're expecting after the polls close tomorrow.
Okay, well, I know you have to run, Secretary. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having
I
me.
appreciate it. Jim, what do you, what is kind of, not that you're a worst case scenario guy, but you kind of are. So I mean, and I'm not saying anything that's not in the public record. You've been pretty clear in your coverage about this. You've been following around groups that either sincerely but still believe to this day that 2020, in spite of overwhelming legal evidence and otherwise, that's not correct, that the election was stolen. People who still vehemently believe that and have based a legal strategy and a grassroots strategy, I guess, in preparation, no matter what the outcome, it seems like this year. So what keeps you up at night?
Do you want to know just the political thing or anything that keeps me up at night?
That's like a later conversation.
Yeah.
So just.
I guess the thing I'm focused on, and I hope I don't need to be focused on, and I'll be curious what our other guests say to this, is we know there are laws in this country. There's a system in place. January 6th did happen, and then a lot happened after that people have taken lessons from. But I guess what I'm focused on is what happens, say, if some local board blocks certification of results, a court says you must, and what if this happens in a lot of places at once, and the courts say you must certify results? I don't know if everyone knows in the room, but these are not, the certification process we saw on January 6th is the end of a multi-step process, all of which each step is mandatory. You certify results. That if some local county holds out, there's a court order to tell them to do it, they say no, then you have to have law enforcement involved, and now you're getting into like a bigger political fight over, are we political prisoners? You're punishing us for our First Amendment right to say no to result. I just see situations like that are what I worry about, which really comes down to people not following the law. Like, I'm not worried about the law. I'm not worried about mostly. I mean, we've seen courts do some funny things over the last couple of years, but not worried about courts doing, making sure people follow the rules. I'm worried about people not following the rules and taking us to a place we haven't been since January 6th and maybe some new ground. But I'd love to be disabused of all of that. And, maybe other people are less worried, because when you talk to longtime voting rights lawyers and election lawyers, there's a lot of confidence that the system will do what it will have to do, and people don't want to go to jail. But, that's what keeps me up at night.
Stephen, do you agree with that? What's your comment on that?
On my optimism?
Well, is what Jim said, does that resonate with you, or what are people talking about? I mean, you're obviously you're in the spaces where people are having these discussions that he's surfacing.
I've seen too much over the last 4 years to be terribly optimistic about election administration and how it's received in the general public, and just how people are going to behave in the context of this election. The vast majority of people are going to be responsible, but this is a point of conflict right now. This is a place where many enterprises have been built, many political careers are being expanded, piggybacking off of false claims of election administration. And so, no, I don't think it will be completely smooth sailing over the next 2 weeks, over the next 2 months, or even over the next 2 years. In Arizona, we have never stopped litigating the 2020 election. We have never stopped spending money addressing the 2020 election. We were the Mecca for a number of years because we even had something called the Cyber Ninjas audit of the 2020 election in Maricopa County that was reviewing by people sympathetic to Trump's stolen election claims, where it was searching everything, and it was sowing more seeds of doubt into the system. We've had law enforcement launch criminal investigations based off the most spurious of reasoning into the offices of election officials. And so, no, it's a brutal position to be in. I would say that I have one of the worst jobs in the United States.
Amazing. I mean, amazing that you would say that. But so there's lawsuits, and then there's, let's get down to the brass tacks of criminal behavior, violence, et cetera. Can you give us some texture and some details as to what law enforcement around the country, and you're part of groups that are, paying close attention to this, preparing, be candid, if you could, about what people are preparing for and what we can expect a response to be, because obviously on Jan 6th, and I was in Washington that day, and we were prepared for some mild protests. I mean, at least, that was the talk, that was on the public understanding. People aren't going to be caught flat-footed, right? Same with state capitals where there were skirmishes and worse. What are you worried about? What are people talking about, and what are some of the details in the preparation from the law enforcement standpoint?
Yeah, just quick system check. I'm sorry?
Yeah, Peter, if you could tell us what
So, and I'm sure Stephen could probably speak really knowledgeably about this, but as I said, this was never a thought. It was never a concern. Our elections always ran very smoothly and were accepted, and we'd never faced this before. Now, for any of you that have ever spoken with, and I'm sure Stephen has, spoken with a person that works the polls, I mean, you know who they are. They're retirees a lot of times, and they're right there. We've got a person that works the polls over there. And they're people that are not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they believe in something, right? And they believe in our system. And I have been with clerks and recorders like Stephen and poll takers and wardens that have been threatened. And these are not only in battle states. We talk about Michigan, but I've seen people from Georgia and even Maine that were speaking about threats to them and to their families. And like it's all something theoretical that we can speak about, but until you look into the eyes of someone that's actually crying, speaking about their experience with this. And when they speak about it, it's not just about them being threatened, but their children being threatened. It was heartrending. And you realize these are the people we should be protecting. And so, yes, we have to take it up. Now, my worst case scenario is, certainly I think there will be problems with the acceptance of these results overall, but we have to be thinking about election day and whether there will be actual interference on election day that might then lead to violence on election day, that might lead to burning, ballots or whatever it might be on election day, that might lead to someone being taken on election day. These are the things we really worry about. And so the preparation we've had to do is entirely different. We're doing preparation for election day now like we've done for any man-made or natural disasters. We're coming to the table and planning with many different agencies to go through the different iterations of what might happen from less bad to the very worst. Working with our secretaries of state, our recorders, our clerks, working with fellow chiefs, federal authorities and state authorities, doing tabletop exercises. If this happens, this is what we do. Exchanging phone numbers. We don't even know who to call now. And then even exchanging or giving guides with information, like my Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, and his elections director, Michelle Tassinari, a guide of certain rules and laws that can be used to kind of make sure the police know what they're doing on those scenes so they can take control of the situation instead of losing control because they don't know what the right thing to do is. My worst case scenario is we have violence at the polls, because once that happens the first time in that way, there's no going back. You know what I mean? Once you do it once, It's easier for it to happen the second time and become worse the third time and the fourth time. And I think that law enforcement across the nation is right now focusing on stopping it that very first time, or nipping it at the bud that very first time, before it becomes catastrophic and becomes the norm again.
So will Americans see this? I mean, will we all, I mean, obviously tons of people have early voted, but are we going to feel a law enforcement presence when we go to vote tomorrow?
I don't think you'll feel a law enforcement presence, but there will be a greater knowledge and understanding and a greater ability to deploy quickly. So I don't think you're going to go to polls and see a lot of police officers. In Massachusetts, we have to have a police officer at every poll. And I don't know what it's like here in Chicago, but police at the polls are a normal thing, right? And it's accepted and actually very comfortable. I don't think you're going to see a larger police presence, but there will be a much greater preparation for that date by all the police and law enforcement authorities, along with the election authorities themselves.
And Claire, I'm going to ask you in a second about what you're seeing, about what he's talking about. If you and Jim are seeing this online, the preparation for what he's worried about. But I see, Stephen, you're nodding your head. Is this resonating with you, these concerns?
I was just saying, if you want to see police officers, if you want to see snipers, if you want to see drones in the air, then just come to our tabulation facility starting tomorrow night at 8 p.m. and they'll be there for a week. If you want to see barricades, if you want to see flood lamps, if you want to see just sheriff's deputies up the wazoo, we'll have them all. I think we'll be ready to overtake New Mexico if we should need to as an office. But unfortunately, that's just the system that we are living in, the reality we're living in Maricopa County. And really, I don't know, I didn't poll my office, my permanent full-time staff office on what they feel about law enforcement 4 years ago. But I promise you, my office is now overwhelmingly pro law enforcement, because we have seen the sheriff of Maricopa County and all the different police departments, Department of Homeland Security, bend over backwards to expend resources. And we know the horrors of when we have had a prosecutor who has bought into this nonsense, or at least played the politics. I can't imagine what it would be like if we had sheriffs or police department directors, or whatever you call the top position in police departments. If they bought into this nonsense, it would be a very frightening scenario, because then all of that would be turned on us.
Stephen, just one thing, if I may, Jennifer. I know that in Maricopa, you have the largest media market in Arizona, and you've got a number of sheriffs around that media market that whenever they do something that is speaking about the integrity of elections, questioning the integrity of elections, they don't do it in their own counties because there's no media market. They come into your county and have big press announcements in your county, really almost causing more problems within your county in protecting the integrity of those elections. Is that the case?
The Maricopa County Sheriff and its occupants have been absolutely wonderful. I will not say the same necessarily about the other 14 county sheriffs in Arizona.
Oh, right. I mean, just listening to how you're describing preparations for Election Day, I mean, I think the official term for this is batshitio, because it just sounds, I mean, it sounds like, like a major, like you said, natural disaster, or, an insurrection or something. Claire, what, and I know you want to break in, Jim, I'm going to let you in 1 second, but Claire, just everything's been described here. Are you seeing the footprints for this and what you're monitoring online?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry to say that, but I mean, for months and months, we have seen that militia are on the rise. And this is not just a political issue. This is not just a social issue. This is a technological issue, and it is a business issue. Now, that last part is the only good news. We need accountability in all assets of society. But what we can have, and what consumers can do, is really understand how these folks are making money. We know that Facebook makes money on ads. We know that X makes money on ads. What you might not know is that all these websites are also making money on ads, and every single executive of every single major brand knows the term brand safety, and they don't want any of their brands to go anywhere near this violent nonsense. And this is a form of accountability that is something that everyone can touch. It's something that we've been doing for years. And then the question is, of course, how are they getting there? And the way that the internet is brokered is the real key here. Advertisers don't place ads themselves on the internet. They get middlemen to do it for them. So when there were thousands of advertisers advertising on charliekirk.com, the millennial white nationalists who sent 80 buses full of people to the insurrection. All we had to do was let Playwire, their ad tech vendor, know that thousands of advertisers were not aware of that, and we were going to make them aware that they were sending their ads to charliekirk.com. Playwire dropped them like a rock within 24 hours.
Interesting, interesting. Jim, what are you
Well,
thinking?
my first call to Recorder Richard this year was on this subject because, and I feel like we don't talk about this enough, what Claire was just talking about, which was you could look at January 6th in a way, what we saw was the platforms were optimized to bring you January 6th because of the algorithmic feeding of engaging quote unquote content, which this voting nonsense can be quite engaging for its audience. And we have seen, and I'm curious what Claire thinks about this, we've seen a breakdown in the system to stop the content was inadequate. It was new in 2020. It didn't work very well. It was really almost non-existent in 16. But what we saw happen is exactly what Claire's talking about got reinterpreted through this disinformation machine and through, frankly, some members of Congress and Elon Musk, that what she's talking about became censorship. And that this apparently that there's a concept now that free speech in this country always meant you could rip down individuals, defame them, which you never could do in broadcast world because of the FCC regulations. But all of the system to try to contain, to create some guardrails around this is gone. I'm wondering what Claire says about, how successful the way you attacked this a couple of years ago with Charlie Kirk, how it's working out now, because Elon Musk has also tried to say, hey, you advertisers who care about this thing called brand safety, go F yourselves, and now you're interfering with elections and free speech. So there's been this big war, and the other side of that hasn't been as vocal as the people trying to make it toxic to try to contain some of this stuff.
Thank you for the question. The free speech absolutists are doing everything they can to muzzle folks that are pointing out this issue. The issue is that advertisers are not in control of their own ads. Now, you would think that that would be trivial, but this is a near $1 trillion industry, and it is turning the volume up past 11 on disinformation and chaos. We are here today because the ad industry of the internet is out of control. So what can we do about it? Yeah, there are lots of ways to think about the content of the ads, the content of the websites, the content that is on social media, and there are lots of very smart people working on that problem, and I commend them for it. The way that Check My Ads sees this, however, is as a business problem. And the way that we see the internet is as a financial marketplace. What do I mean by that? Advertisers don't place ads themselves on the internet, as I said. They get middlemen to do it for them. But it's not just one middleman. Usually, it's somewhere between 4 and 7 middlemen daisy-chained together in a supply chain. So the ad hops from one to the next, as does the money, as does any data. It goes back and forth. There is a buy side of this marketplace, that is advertisers trying to buy ad space, and there is a sell side of this marketplace, that is websites trying to sell ad space. I'm sorry to get technical, and I promise you that's all you need to know. But in the middle, there is an ad exchange. And what it looks like to me is like a stock exchange, a financial market, and we can regulate it, not as an information superhighway, which is how the internet was described in the 90s, but as a financial marketplace. We need transparency and accountability for the buyers, just like we do for consumers in consumer protection laws. What does that mean? Advertisers should be able to know where their ads go. We want hourly log level data reports, that is hourly detailed reports about where the ad campaigns go for every single advertiser of every size on this system. We want refunds when their ads go to places that cause insurrections. And we want to know who along that daisy chain is trafficking in the ads, because these companies, these ad tech companies, are very powerful. They're traffic controlling $1 trillion. And we don't know who owns these companies. We don't know where they're located in the world. We often don't know where they bank. We know the big ones, but there are hundreds and hundreds of small ones that we don't know. And if we start regulating this industry like we do a financial marketplace, instead of wringing our hands about free speech, we can move forward in a way that I think will unlock a lot of this problem and turn the volume down on this electoral chaos.
Well, here we are still one day out. And by the way, in about a little less than 10 minutes, I will offer the opportunity for people in the room to ask questions of our panelists. As always at an IOP event, we will give priorities to students. Stephen, I wanted to just go back to you because you're listening to this and you're still preparing. She's talking a lot about, what Claire's talking a lot about is going forward, and you're still in the very much here and now and in the tomorrow. And it just strikes me listening to you talk about this and what you thought this job was when you signed up. You know, I will say the Arizona Recorder 10 years ago would have sounded like a job that was, I don't want to use the word boring, but, you know, definitely, you know, not the way you're describing it. I mean, and you've just, again, you've been in the white hot center of it. How has this, candidly, how's this been for you personally? This must have really just fundamentally shifted your views about so many things, and just been so challenging for you personally and professionally. Can you reflect on that a little bit?
There's a lot. Let's see. I have 6 criminal indictments right now for people who have threatened to kill me and have taken steps to do so. So I get to go visit some of those people I have 2 different trials for those people coming up. I am regularly involved in litigation challenging the election process. I probably practice more law now than I did as an actual attorney at a law firm. Communications and security is baked into every single thing that we do. Administration is actually just one piece of the puzzle. And it's brutal. You have to be more of a firefighter than an accountant now to work in Arizona or in a large competitive county to want to sign up for this, because we get more attention. Our office gets more attention than the office of a U.S. Senator here, just because this has been the focal point. And that has some negative ramifications, and it's sent some of our team members away. It sent some of them into dark places. And I think the only way that we ultimately solve this is that, to Claire's point, is we change the incentive structure, whether financially or politically. I think it's amazing to hear what Claire's doing, but I think that we still have a long way to go on that front. And I would say that that is entirely consistent with being a free speech absolutist, because if you pull your ads, then that's just the market working. And you have never had a free speech First Amendment right to defame somebody. And so if hypothetically somebody accused me of inserting 300,000 fraudulent ballots into the voting system, that would be defamation. That's not a hypothetical. If hypothetically Rudy Giuliani accused 2 Georgia election workers of carrying away bags of ballots, that would be defamation. And so I think that another development that we are going to see is a honing in on defamation law and how it plays out in election administration. And I'm hopeful that in the future that can have a positive impact as well.
And yes, and Rudy Giuliani has less awesome real estate than he did 4 years ago, I think, as a result of what you're talking about. Before I go to the room, Peter, maybe again, just a little bit more on the specifics. Are there particular states or particular jurisdictions that are really on high alert tomorrow and in the oncoming week?
Well, you would consider, of course, the 7 battleground states, right? I mean, you think about, 4 years ago, it was a difference of 330,000 votes between those 7 battleground states out of 330 million votes. That's how close it was. But then when you consider it's the 7 or 8 battleground counties within those battleground states, it just shows you how fine-tuned we are. This is something that is happening everywhere, though. And one thing I do want to give a little bit of hope here, too, is that Stephen was speaking about the law enforcement support, and Claire speaking about, kind of stepping in and finding where the money's coming from. There are groups that are out there that are working with law enforcement and election officials There's States United Democracy Center, and there's a Committee for Safe and Secure Elections, which is based out of the Brennan Center, by the way, which is has used as a consultant Sheriff Paul Penzone from Maricopa County and Sheriff Justin Smith from Colorado that I've worked with. So there are groups that are actually trying to find that space in the middle of our governmental law enforcement and government officials to try to bring education and supports to those authorities around the country that is really making a big difference. Those think tanks that are actually out there advocating and educating in a way that no one else could. They're doing a great job out there for us.
Okay, well, I want to open it up to the room again, starting with students. You have, again, Jim Rutenberg in his office, the New York Times in New York. Claire's also, even though she looks like she's in Los Angeles, I believe also in New York. And we have our reporter there in Maricopa County, and of course, the sheriff here. So go ahead, I'll start right there.
Peter, I was wondering, you kind of briefly have maybe like touched on this, but what happens if there's a scenario in which law enforcement in different counties or states don't kind of go with enforcing the law and do actually become accomplices or on the side of people that are harassing voters, you know, election denial, anything like that? Like, what does that scenario look like? How are there countermeasures to protect against that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Stephen put it well. You've got wherever you are in this country, you've got the major counties and the major law enforcement organizations that generally should be very true to protection of election security. But all around this country, you've got some small police departments and small sheriff's offices that may not be quite as true to protecting these people and these processes. So I think that's where there'll be a lot more attention than will really be deserved, because there'll be a couple of places that will have real problems that will then show an indication there's problems across this country. And I don't think that there will be to that level, because the level of sophistication in the more significant counties and those states that are really working this will be much stronger and better and protective of what is going to go on over these next 24 hours. But again, it's going to come down to 7 states and 7 or 8 counties. Doesn't mean we won't have problems in some of those other states and other counties as well. But if they're doing their jobs, they should have no problems. But there will always be outliers, because there are always outliers in small towns, small counties. There will always be outliers. There will be some issues going on. Good question.
Hello, my name is Vani, and I'm a resident of Wellesley, so a resident of Middlesex County. I was wondering, do local police offices and sheriff's offices have the ability and infrastructure to monitor social media and the internet to see what's going on within their towns?
That's a great question. So they will. Cities or towns can do that themselves. They have the technologies to do that. But generally, they'll work in a regional way through they'll have municipal law enforcement councils. In Massachusetts, they wouldn't do it by county as much, but they will work with the state police and the federal authorities through their fusion centers, which are always checking. So understand that social media is always being checked by these fusion centers, by state and federal fusion centers that are sharing information every single day, and also reports, independent reports. I will get reports coming to me about issues, threats. I will then report them into these fusion centers and to the appropriate other authorities. So that is always being funneled in so that they have a greater awareness than probably we understand. Great question.
Anyone over here, over there? Here comes the mic. And if you want to address anyone there, the camera's over there.
Sure. So I have a question for all of the panelists. Is there a specific point during the election process where you expect problems to be most likely, like during counting, during the polls themselves, aftermath?
Yeah, I'll say in the ensuing days, especially here in Arizona, and especially in Western states that are competitive because of the nature in which we process and tabulate ballots, we will not have our results within 24 hours. It is very likely that we will not know who wins Nevada, who wins Arizona, who wins also Wisconsin is affected by this, Pennsylvania is affected by this within 24 hours. That is a petri dish for discontent. And when Alex Jones and a whole bunch of people with guns visited our parking lot in 2020, it wasn't the day before election, it wasn't during election day. It was when results started to be released and people were dissatisfied one way or another with the results, and they started making noise about that as if that would somehow improve the situation.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I have a question for Claire. This is my first time hearing about your organization, which is really cool. And I wanted to bring up something that I feel like a lot of people my age have like a really intimate relationship to this like cultural phenomena of the completely unregulated internet. And I just wanted to think about like what you were saying about the movements and also like philosophy you have towards the way the internet interacts with a lot of the things we're talking about today. It's just like when we think about how like acts of terrorism have traditionally been responded to by regulation, like specifically thinking about like the differences in internet privacy that I know came up a lot, like last time there was a huge terrorist thing. How does that relate to what you think about going forward for the internet today? Like, do you see increased regulation of finance on the internet going to be an actually like conducive way to like, how do I say this? Protect people rather than, in a sense, further establish like areas of dominion on the internet?
Thank you for that question. Nice to meet you. Yeah, we played whack-a-mole on this for years. When we started the campaign to defund the insurrectionists, we were just doing investigations and then making sure that there was accountability for the people who were sending ads to those websites, not for the advertisers because they didn't have control, not even really for the people who were causing acts of terrorism to happen with disinformation, but for the people who were making money, traffic controlling the ads to those places. And the only reason that we had that lever for accountability is because, and I say this as surprised as most people will be in this room, because the brands are on our side when it comes to this issue. When it comes to violent acts of terrorism, intimidation, sanctioned websites that have been sanctioned by the US government, no corporate office wants anything to do with it. And that is a lever for us. That means that we can make sure that we protect them and their right to freely speak or freely advertise where they want to be and not to be where they don't want to be. Does that answer your question?
I think we have like one or two more. I know you had your hand up.
Hi to the panelists. Thanks so much for your time, both virtually and in person. I'm Matt. I'm a grad student in public policy here at the university. I think the question I wanted to ask was if you can opine, and maybe the answers we still don't fully know, but what kind of proximately do folks think is the origin of this distrust in our election systems? I mean, we can point to J6 as like a very specific, chaotic, violent, fatal event, but I don't think people understand it as starting on that day. And there's also obviously contributions from Trump himself, top down. But where does this come from, and what does that mean for the outlook moving forward for future elections?
Jim, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I could take a stab. I mean, there's been a fight over voting in this country since its founding in a way, right? And we wrote 10 years ago, the first story I did about voting was that after the Voting Rights Act, there was a fight over voting. And the specter of voter fraud has been ever present when the fight was over curtailing certain, at times, it depends on who's doing it, right? But there was at least one clear effort to curtail some voting rights based on the specter of voter fraud. But that was pursued somewhat there was a philosophical move behind it. I mean, even Justice Roberts thought that the Voting Rights Act had overreach. They got rid of the provision that monitored what states could do with their voting rules. But that there was a legal conservative movement, but Trump took it and just blew it sky high by not arguing over voting rules and gerrymandering and strict voter ID, but I started going after the very system, the administration of elections. That was sort of the new wrinkle. And so there was a pre-existing debate and fight before Trump, but Trump just took it to this new place. And you can't put it all on him, But that started this as a different kind of movement, a more populist movement. And what I found the last few months, spending time with the people who are part of that movement, is a lot of them are not cynical people, at least that I could tell. They really believe it. And if you really believe some of these conspiracies, these are horrible things. I mean, if you believe that a presidential election was stolen, maybe you're going to be compelled to go to storm the Capitol. So I've said this before, but recently, on the daily, but our podcast, but I think if he were to lose and said, stop it, I'm conceding, everything's fine, not going to happen, right? But just theoretically, I don't think he could stop this. So I think it's become its own movement. It's about election administration, and it's taken on a life of its own, as Recorder Richer is attesting to. He's living it. So it's a different thing.
If I could just add to what Jim's saying, this is not sudden, right? This has been quietly building in our country for many years now. There was a disaffection that we had not understood was out there, right? It was out there. We just didn't know it. And then one candidate tapped into it. And if you recall, we all thought the former president was crazy. Oh my God, why do you say that stuff? Now, I don't know if he did it intentionally. He was like, it was this brilliant political mind, or the fact is it was just, that's what he tapped into, right? But the fact is, when he started speaking about people and events in ways that touched people that were frustrated and angry and disaffected out there, they believed. And shame on us for not knowing. You know, I don't know how, in retrospect, I think about this all the time. How could we have known that people were so hurting and so frustrated out there that it would carry us to this point? And I don't know how we get back, right? Sometimes I feel like it's not even possible. But the fact is, this was going on. We had no idea for many years prior to this point. And now what I think we should do is, you know, hopefully as we get through this period of time, and I don't know how long it's going to take us to get through this period of time when we can actually unify as a country again, how do we watch for this in the future and to see, is there disaffection? Is there this antipathy about government and society out there in 10 years or 15 years how do we monitor that? How do we feel that? And how do we answer to it? Because if people are hurting and frustrated, like Jim said, if you believe this, I've got people in my jail that believe certain things. And I wish, and I feel so badly for them because in their heart of hearts, they believe it. It's crazy to the rest of us. It's not true, but it's their reality. There's a lot of hurting people out there right now, and we've got to figure out how to way to touch them and make them a little bit more whole, a little bit better.
Okay, well, I think, Peter, you might be able to stick around for a few minutes if people want to visit with
Yes.
you. But I think that concludes our panel. Thank you so much to our guests who joined us on a very, very busy day for all of you. We really, really greatly appreciate you taking an hour of your day to hang out with us and talk to us about these incredibly important issues. And thank you all for coming tonight as well.